300 kilometers per hour. Flat out through Suzuka. No lifting. No mistakes. No warning. And suddenly, the car loses over 60 kilometers per hour. Not because of damage. Not because of the driver. Because the battery is completely empty. This is not a theory anymore. It already happened today. In real telemetry. In real laps. In front of every team. And now Formula One has a serious problem. Cars that look fast, but collapse when energy disappears. Drivers pushing at maximum, while the system takes power away from them. And teams are realizing something much worse. This isn't a small flaw. This is built into the rules. Meaning every single race could turn into controlled chaos. Unexpected slowdowns. Massive speed differences. And moments that feel dangerous at over 300 kilometers per hour. But here's the detail nobody is talking about yet. This problem doesn't just affect performance. It completely changes how racing works. Overtakes. Defense. Strategy. Everything. And what happened today in Japan might be the warning sign Formula One can't ignore anymore. If you want to understand why teams are already panicking, subscribe now. Because the real reason behind this crisis is much bigger than anyone expected. At first, nobody wanted to say it out loud. Because what they were seeing didn't make sense. Drivers came on the radio, calm at first. Then confused. Then frustrated. They were not complaining about grip. Not about balance. Not even about traffic. They were saying something much more unsettling. I'm losing speed on the straight. And that sentence alone changes everything. Because in Formula One, the straight is sacred. It's the one place where everything should work perfectly. Full power. Maximum deployment. Pure performance. So when multiple drivers start reporting the same issue, you know it's not coincidence. You know it's something deeper. But here's where things take a turn. Because this didn't start in Japan. Suzuka just exposed it. The first warning signs appeared earlier this season. Small drops in speed. Moments that looked like hesitation. Easy to ignore. Easy to explain away. But now? Now it's impossible to hide. Because Suzuka doesn't forgive weaknesses. It amplifies them. Long corners. Continuous load. Very little braking. Which means one critical thing. Almost no chance to recharge. And this is where the chain reaction begins. Drivers push hard through the opening sector. Everything feels fast. Everything feels under control. But behind the scenes, the battery is draining faster than anyone expected. Corner after corner. Deployment after deployment. Until suddenly, the system hits its limit. And when that happens, the car changes instantly. Not gradually. Not smoothly. Instantly. Because the system switches from giving power to taking it away. And that moment is what shocked every single team today. Because the driver does nothing different. Same throttle. Same line. Same commitment. But the car stops behaving like a race car. It becomes something else. Something unpredictable. And this is the detail that's starting to worry engineers the most. Because it's not just about losing speed. It's about losing control of when it happens. And that's dangerous. But what makes this even more critical is that teams can't simply fix it. This is not a setup issue. Not a small adjustment. Not something you solve overnight. This is built into the core of the car. Into how energy is used. And more importantly, how it runs out. But here's the part that very few people fully understand yet. And this is where everything connects. Because what we saw today is not just a problem. It's a preview. A preview of what Formula One could look like if nothing changes. And once you see the next piece of this puzzle, you start to understand why some drivers are already calling this the beginning of something much bigger. But here's where everything starts to spiral out of control. Because once teams understood what was happening, they realized something far worse. This isn't just about losing energy. It's about when you lose it. And more importantly, where. Suzuka is not just any track. It's one of the fastest, most unforgiving circuits in the world. There are sections where drivers don't breathe. They commit. Fully. And one of those sections changes everything. 130R. For decades, this corner has been a symbol. Courage. Precision. Absolute trust in the car. Flat out at over 300 kilometers per hour. No hesitation. No second thoughts. But today, that corner became something else entirely. Because now, drivers arrive there with a question in their mind. Not about grip. Not about the line. About energy. Do I have enough battery, or not? And that question alone destroys the essence of that corner. Because if the answer is no, the car doesn't just feel slower. It drops speed in the middle of the turn. Violently. Unpredictably. Exactly what we saw in the data today. A loss so extreme that drivers were forced to adapt instantly, even downshifting in places where you should never downshift. And that changes everything. Because now, what used to be a test of bravery becomes a calculation, a management exercise, a system limitation, not driver skill. And this is where frustration turns into anger. Because drivers are no longer just racing the track. They are fighting the car itself, managing something invisible, something that can disappear without warning. But here's the detail that makes this even more critical. And almost nobody is talking about it yet. This doesn't just affect one lap. It affects every lap. Because once the battery drops, the entire rhythm of the race changes. Drivers start lifting earlier, managing corners differently, sacrificing speed in one section, just to survive the next. And that creates a completely new kind of racing. Slower in some places, chaotic in others, and completely unpredictable overall. But then, something even more controversial appears. Because while some drivers are forced to slow down, others are doing the exact opposite. Deploying everything. Full power. Maximum energy. And that creates a gap. A massive one. A difference so big that it doesn't feel real. One car suddenly crawling. Another one flying. And the closing speed becomes terrifying. This is where the danger truly begins. Because at those speeds, you don't have time to react. You don't have time to understand what's happening. And that's why inside the paddock, there's a growing concern. Not just about performance, but about safety. But even that is not the most controversial part. Because what's coming next is what's turning this from a technical issue into a full-blown crisis. And once you see how overtaking is now affected by all of this, you start to understand why some drivers are calling this artificial racing. And this is where everything completely breaks. Because Formula One tried to solve one problem and accidentally created a much bigger one. Overtaking. For years, it was already difficult. Dirty air, tire management, track position. So the solution was clear. Give drivers a tool. Something extra. Something powerful. And that's how this new system was born. More energy. More speed. More opportunity. At least, that was the idea. But in reality, it doesn't work like that. Not even close. Because the moment a driver gets close enough, they activate this extra energy. And suddenly, the car comes alive. Faster on the straight. Stronger on exit. Almost impossible to defend against. The overtake happens. Clean. Easy. Inevitable. But then, something strange happens. Something nobody expected at this level. The driver who just attacked becomes vulnerable immediately. Why? Because that extra energy comes at a cost. A massive one. It drains the battery even faster. So on the very next straight, the roles reverse. Completely. The car that was just overtaken now has more energy, more deployment, more speed. And the car in front starts losing power. Again. So the overtake gets reversed. Almost instantly. And then it happens again. And again. And again. Like a loop. Like a cycle that never stabilizes. And this is where drivers started saying something very serious. This doesn't feel real. It feels artificial. Because they are no longer fighting each other. They are managing a system. Timing energy. Predicting drops. Trying to avoid becoming the next car that suddenly slows down. And that's not racing instinct. That's calculation. That's survival. But here's the part that makes this even worse. Because it's not just happening in isolated moments. It's shaping entire battles. Entire strategies. Even entire races. Drivers are now thinking 2 corners ahead. 3 straights ahead. Not about how to attack, but when not to. Because overtaking at the wrong time means losing the position right after. And that creates hesitation. Doubt. A completely different mindset inside the cockpit. But then, there's another layer to this. One that teams are only now starting to fully understand. Because this system doesn't just affect drivers. It affects the car itself. The balance changes. The behavior shifts. Especially when everything is deployed at once. And this leads to something even more dangerous. Because when the car switches into maximum efficiency mode, it loses stability. Front grip disappears. The car starts to understeer. And suddenly, the driver is not just managing energy. They are fighting the steering wheel. Correcting. Adjusting. Trying to keep the car on track. All while traveling at extreme speed. And this is where everything connects. Energy loss. Overtaking instability. Unpredictable behavior. All happening at the same time. And teams are realizing something they didn't expect this early. They are not in full control. Not completely. Because the system decides when energy is taken. not the driver, not even fully the team. And that creates a new kind of uncertainty, one that Formula One has never really had before. But here's the turning point, the moment where concern becomes urgency. Because after everything seen today, after all the data, after all the feedback, there is one question spreading across the paddock. Not quietly, not carefully, but openly. What happens when this goes wrong in a race? Because practice is one thing, controlled environment, space between cars, time to react. But on Sunday, there is no space, no margin, no second chances. And if this system creates the wrong situation at the wrong moment, the consequences won't be small. And that is exactly why, behind the scenes, something has already started. Discussions, emergency talks, possible changes. Because what we saw today was not just a problem, it was a warning. And what comes next could define the future of Formula One itself.